Have you ever dreamed of having two screens on a laptop? I'm sure I did. Back in the day when I had conversations with my high school friends, we came up with some interesting designs that had two displays. We jam-packed it with some high-end specs, fastest CPU, GPU, and memory available at the time. I don't even know where those sketches are right now. We probably ended up throwing that out. But anyways, we're slowly starting to see that dream turn into reality with a lot of these dual screen notebooks entering into the market. And it has been generating some mixed reactions within the community. Some say that it is amazing. I can do so many things with that second screen. I'm gonna be a productivity champ. Creators can take advantage of that little display, whereas others think that it is a gimmick. Why add a second screen on a notebook? It adds heat to the system. It's probably gonna affect battery life and performance, and potentially it also results in notebook designs that don't look like laptops anymore. So in front of me is HP's OMEN X 2S. It's a really powerful gaming laptop, features Intel's Core i7 9-gen CPU, 16 GB of RAM, a terabyte of PCI SSD, 144Hz G-Sync display, an RTX 2080 Max-Q. This thing is absolutely spec'd out. But above all of that, HP has implemented a second display that allows gamers, streamers, or anyone who can take advantage of that second screen the flexibility to run multiple apps at the same time. The starting price of the 2S is a little over $1,800 US, and for that, you get a smaller SSD and an RTX 2070 Max-Q GPU. The spec that I have over here costs around $2,400, but you can spend nearly $4,000 to spec this thing out. But instead of making this a typical notebook review, I'm gonna be focusing on that second screen. How does it actually benefit a gamer, considering that this is a gaming laptop? Does it affect performance, battery life? Does it also affect thermal issues as well? Basically, what is it like using a notebook with two screens? Well, allow me to walk you through my experience, but first, a quick message from our sponsor.
The Sound Blaster A9 is a special kind of treat for audio enthusiasts with their best EMI shielding yet, a fantastic DAC and swappable op-amps, plus a well-designed breakout box that includes an XLR input. Your ears deserve the best, and perhaps your motherboard needs a friend. Check it out below.
Alright, so what you're looking at is a 6-inch 1080p 60Hz display with touch support. When you boot up the notebook, HP's Command Center takes over the screen automatically, where it allows the user to monitor system resources. You can also switch between different performance modes like comfort, default, and dynamic power performance, which was the mode that was used to run the benchmarks. This changes the behavior of the CPU and the GPU. Then you can customize the RGB lighting of the system, but oddly enough, it won't let you customize the keyboard until you open Command Center on the primary display, so keep that in mind. The next tab lets you screen mirror a particular portion of your gameplay, and I'll get to that in just a moment. The last tab offers a few more settings for the screen, including the ability to enable or disable touch support for the screen while you're in a gameplay. Now, this is a standalone display, which means you can bring in any program you like to the second screen and start working off of it. The downside is that it is a glossy display, which means it's extremely difficult to view content outdoors, and the view angles are pretty terrible. I wouldn't recommend watching videos on the screen. There is a weird magenta shift when you look at it from a normal position, and contrast is just way off. But if you stare at it directly overhead, it's fine, except you'd look ridiculous that way. HP has built a few keys right above the numpad that allows you to turn off the display. Although do keep in mind that it doesn't disconnect itself from the GPU, Windows still sees it as a second screen. You also have the ability to adjust the brightness of the display, and an interesting feature that lets you switch apps instantly between the main display and the secondary display. So for instance, if you're working off of the main display and you have a video playing in the background on the second screen, and you caught something really exciting in the video that you want to bring into your main display as quick as possible, that button is supposed to switch the video to this main screen and then what's on the main screen to the second screen, except it barely worked on my sample. Sometimes I ended up getting glitches on the video on the main display that just looked weird. In other cases, it just didn't work. It was a little bit frustrating to see this feature not work, especially since it is very application dependent. So it may work with some apps like Discord, Spotify, or other casual apps. And also do keep in mind that if you have a game running in the main display and if you want to switch that, it's just not going to work. Moving on to actual use case scenarios. Well, to be honest, I have mixed feelings about using this second display. Let's start off with the basic stuff like bringing in your file explorer while working on something else on the main screen. It could be useful if you want to quickly access things, but I had some difficulty reading the text because the screen is just way too small. What's really cool is that as soon as you drag the window from the main display to the second screen, it automatically snaps into full screen mode. Although keep in mind that it does not work with every application, so that's something to keep note of. I think one of my favorite use cases is browsing through my Spotify playlist. The app does a pretty good job with scaling and it's fairly intuitive to navigate around with. If you're into Discord, the screen works pretty well with the app. You can coordinate with your fellow teammates by talking to them while playing, and it doesn't interrupt your gameplay that's running on your main screen, which is really cool. If you're into streaming and if you use OBS, this is a great way to monitor your stream on the second screen while focusing on your main task. I think this would come in super handy for streamers on the go. I should also mention that you're only allowed to run one application at a time on this display. You can't split screens, although that would look worse in the first place. Then there's the real-time screen mirroring feature that allows you to snip a portion of your gameplay and magnify it onto the second screen. It sounds like it's pretty straightforward, but it isn't, because there are some things that you have to keep in mind before trying this out. First, every game that you run should be on borderless windowed mode, because it is a secondary display after all, and you need to be able to move the cursor from top to bottom. Secondly, you have to define the specific area before the gameplay starts, because once you're in, the snipping feature won't work, and you can't change it in real time, so you have to hit escape, assign the area, and get back in. Now, does this screen mirroring feature make you a better gamer? Not really, because I didn't take advantage of it. I mean, a few use cases that you could take advantage of is probably bringing in your maps or your health status, or potentially if you want to magnify your shooting target to target your enemy, that is one use case scenario. But realistically speaking, guys, it is something that you're running on a flat display that's literally on a horizontal surface, and you're kind of supposed to focus on what's on the main display. And if you just lose your focus for just a second and look on your second screen, someone might just snipe you within that second. So you just lose that momentum that you've been building up so far. So it's a cool concept, but I don't think it would significantly, or it would help you become a better gamer. That's just my take. Now, I did try running some creative applications like Adobe Premiere, but guys, I hate to say this again, but the screen is just way too small to accommodate the timeline, and the scaling is pretty terrible. It's very difficult to read text when you're viewing at a normal distance. I tried bringing in other panels like Lumetri scopes and Lumetri color, but unfortunately, it's just difficult to read the text on top of the glossy screen. Plus, the not so great viewing angles make it an unviable solution. I also experienced some quirks with the second screen. So when I'm having a video playing in the background on this display and have something on my main display, whether if it's running a game or perhaps in Resolve or something like that, the video actually starts stuttering, which really wasn't pleasing to the eye. Also, the screen just stopped responding to me. Sometimes it just wouldn't work. If I'm trying to bring a window from my main display to the second display, it's completely disabled. It gets disconnected from the GPU, which means I had to get it fixed with a restart. So that was a bit annoying. Like I said, the hardware still needs refinements, and most importantly, software is something that HP certainly has to take a look into. So does the second display benefit me in any shape or form? I personally can't bring it into my workflow, but I think that this could be a great solution for streamers on the go. With all of that out of the way, let's quickly talk about the design of this laptop. Well, it is a gaming laptop after all. HP has stuck with their OMEN mantra for a while now, and they haven't really done anything different here. The front panel has an interesting choice of textures. I'm glad that it isn't brushed aluminum. The OMEN logo is backlit and RGB, and you can customize that through the command center. The build quality of the 2S is really good. It's actually a little bit on the heavier side, coming in at over 5 pounds. So even though that it might look like a thin gaming laptop, it isn't necessarily light. It's certainly heavier than my Razer Blade 15. Opening up the notebook, you're greeted with the keyboard and trackpad shifted to the bottom. This is of course due to that second screen. The keys have a good amount of travel distance and it's tactile. It's much better than my Razer Blade 15. I'd say it's on par to the Aero 15X from Gigabyte, so that's a good thing. It's also RGB backlit and customizable through Command Center. The trackpad is shifted to the right-hand side, and to be honest with you, it's easier to get used to, but I feel like it's a bit too small. Again, this is because I'm used to trackpads that are larger. On the positive side, the surface is really smooth for navigation. It is one of the best trackpads that I've used on a notebook, thanks to precision drivers. Plus, you also get dedicated left and right buttons, and with the help of pressing this button, it brings up a virtual numpad on the second screen. Port selection is decent. On the left-hand side, there's power in, HDMI 2.0, two USB 3.1 Gen 1 Type A ports instead of Gen 2. That's a big red flag, guys. I mean, this laptop costs over $2,400 and you're getting I/O that's not up to spec. So basically, you won't have access to the 10 gigabits per second protocol with Gen 2 because you're stuck with 5 gigabits per second with Gen 1. As for the rest of the ports, there's gigabit Ethernet, headphone, and mic jack. On the right-hand side, there's an extra 3.1 Gen 1 port and a Thunderbolt 3 port that also functions as DP 1.4. The display on the 2S is great. It's a 1080p 144Hz IPS screen with G-Sync. I had an absolute blast gaming on it. Color reproduction is really good, and I didn't notice any backlit bleed with my naked eye, so that's nice. In terms of upgradability, when you open up this laptop, you have instant access to the memory modules, which are populated. You also have an additional M.2 slot for expandability, so that's nice. This notebook comes with a 72 watt-hour battery, and unfortunately, battery life is not great. And I expected this because it's got high-end specs, a 144Hz G-Sync display, and on top of that, you also have a second screen running off of that graphics card. So with my light load test, I got roughly over 2.5 hours, and on heavy load tests, maybe close to 2 hours. But interestingly enough, I decided to run these tests with the second display turned on, and that also significantly brings down the battery life. So certainly not the best, and something to definitely keep note of. The i7-9750H 6-core 12-thread CPU performs like a champ. The clock speeds were hitting 4.4 gigahertz on all 6 cores, and it is the fastest notebook CPU that I've seen. As you can see with the Cinebench R15, R20, and Blender tests, it takes the lead compared to the Legion Wi-Fi 45 featuring that same CPU. Moving on to my Adobe Premiere benchmark, unfortunately, it did not do well. The system took over 20 minutes to render our 13-minute 4K project, and I expected this because it's running a G-Sync display and UHD graphics is disabled, and the user does not have the option to disable G-Sync to enable UHD graphics like what you were able to do with the Y740 from Lenovo. So yeah, when it comes to Adobe Premiere, the rendering performance is not that great. However, if you plan on editing with DaVinci Resolve, the studio version to be exact, this thing is going to fly because you've got that RTX 2080 Max Q to take advantage of. Gaming, on the other hand, was, as expected, fantastic. You can easily push over 100 frames per second in pretty much every AAA title like Battlefield 1, Overwatch, and Apex Legends. Far Cry 5 and Shadow of the Tomb Raider also did really well. But I thought to myself, since this laptop comes with a second display, does it actually impact gaming performance? Well, it certainly does, but nothing significant to a point where it's unplayable. I ran a 4K video on that screen and ran these benchmarks. Taking a look at temperatures, and things are not looking good, guys. You see, when I was briefed on this notebook, HP mentioned that they used liquid metal from Thermal Grizzly on the CPU and GPU. And I was really excited about that until I put it to the test. As you can see, the CPU gets to a whopping 97C. And guys, this is just when rendering a video using Adobe Premiere. That's disappointing and really odd considering liquid metal is supposed to bring down those temps significantly. Interestingly enough, I didn't notice the clock speeds throttle while running these tests, so it looks like the CPU was being pushed to its limits. But that application seemed to work really well with the GPU. The max temp I saw on the RTX 2080 Max Q was 68C, and that's damn good for a GPU of that caliber. And the clock speeds on the GPU were hitting about 1600 megahertz, so that's up to spec. I should also mention that that secondary display adds heat to the system, so as you can see by these thermal shots back and forth, there is a significant difference between the two when the display is turned off and turned on with a game running in the background. Fan noise is respectable. Under gaming scenarios, it doesn't sound like a jet fan, which is nice, but during idle scenarios, you can still hear the fans ramp up. I'm just gonna stay silent for a second so you guys can listen for yourselves. So hopefully that gave you a rough idea. There is unfortunately no way to control the fan RPMs through Command Center. I still feel like the software is a little bit limiting in that area, so hopefully HP could update that in the future. Oh, and for those of you wondering about performance differences between comfort, default, and dynamic power performance, well, here are the numbers on my Cinebench R15 run. Yes, there is a difference, so it really depends on what you want to do at an instant. So I guess this brings us to the conclusion. And guys, I know it's been a long one, but I hope I was able to answer a lot of the questions that you guys might have had with this laptop. But let's kick things off with that second display. It's a cool implementation. I gotta give HP the credit for implementing and thinking out of the box in terms of implementing one in a gaming notebook, but it still has a lot of work to be done. First and foremost, it's glossy, it's small, the text is very difficult to read, especially on a normal viewing distance, and I wish HP was able to extend the display all the way to the left and the right so you get a little bit more virtual screen real estate. The battery life is also pretty terrible on this notebook, but that is to be expected considering the specs. And it just isn't your typical gaming laptop that you can lug around with. It's more of a temporary plug-and-play solution, and that's obviously due to the trackpad and the keyboard shifted towards the bottom. So you also lose the lappability, which is certainly something to consider, especially if you plan on taking this to, say, university or your workplace. There are a lot of factors to consider before pulling the trigger on this laptop. Not to mention, it starts at $1,800. And for that, you get an RTX 2070 Max-Q and a 1440Hz G-Sync display. And I'm glad that they aren't charging a boatload of cash for that second screen. But my biggest issue with this laptop are those CPU temperatures. They just run way too hot, especially on a regular workload like rendering a video in Adobe Premiere. It just doesn't make any sense. They say that they have applied liquid metal on the CPU, but I just can't see that working that well, especially on this notebook. On the other hand, it does cool that RTX 2080 Max-Q really well. I mean, 68C under full load, that's just amazing. So with all of that being said, I want to know your thoughts about the OMEN X 2S gaming laptop. What do you guys think about it? I want to know your thoughts about this second display. Is it something that you can take advantage of? If you're a streamer who's watching this video, I want to know your thoughts about that second screen. Do you see yourself taking advantage of it, especially if you're on the go? Again, chime in the comments down below. I'm Ibor with Hardware Canucks. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to check out some relevant content over here. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button for more content. I'm signing off, and I'll see you guys in the next one.